You wake up believing you made a choice. You turned left instead of right. You called that person. You quit that job. But what if every single act, every so-called decision was not born from your will, but from an invisible design written long before your birth? Rudolf Steiner once said that destiny is not a chain imprisoning us, but a melody we forgot we were the ones who composed. The problem is that most people live deaf to their own music. They think they are improvising, but the score was carved into their soul ages ago. Every pain, every joy, every betrayal is a note from that secret composition. And tonight, you're going to hear it. Imagine this, a spiderweb stretched across centuries, delicate yet unbreakable, shimmering only when hit by light. You are the spider and the prey, the architect and the one ensnared. Steiner called these filaments the threads of karma, patterns of moral cause and effect, yes, but also forgotten promises between souls. He saw existence not as a straight line, but as an intricate weaving of intentions, mistakes, and second chances. To him, the present moment was not just now. It was the sum of every heartbeat you ever had, echoing through time, shaping the direction of your next breath. There's a strange comfort in that, isn't there? The idea that what breaks you might also be what saves you. That the friend who betrayed you, the lover who vanished, the illness that slowed your steps, all of it had a script, and the script had meaning. Steiner described karma as a conversation between your higher self and your forgetful self. The higher self writes, the forgetful self lives the story and calls it chaos. The drama of life is simply the soul trying to remember what it already knows. But there's a darker side to this understanding, because once you see the threads, you can never unsee them. You begin to notice the repetitions, the same arguments with different faces, the same loss wearing new names, the same streets leading back to the same mistakes. It's not life mocking you, it's your destiny replaying unfinished lessons. Steiner warned that humanity is addicted to amnesia. We fall asleep in the middle of our own stories, then call the nightmare unfair when it loops again. He believed each human encounter is karmic choreography, a dance between spirits that agreed to meet long before time began. The person who breaks your heart may be paying a debt or collecting one. The one who guides you in silence might be balancing an ancient promise. To Steiner, even your enemies are sacred collaborators. No one crosses your path by accident. The soul recognizes what the mind refuses to see. Science, in its cautious language, is beginning to nod in that direction. Geneticists speak of epigenetic memories, traumas and tendencies passed across generations, sculpting behavior like invisible fingerprints. Neuropsychologists observe how repeated emotional patterns carve grooves into the brain, forcing us to relive the same cycles until awareness interrupts them. What Steiner called karma, the modern world calls inheritance and conditioning. Different words, same haunting truth. We are haunted by what we refuse to heal. He once told his students that every soul enters life carrying 3 debts, to itself, to others, and to the world. These debts are not punishment, they are opportunities for balance. The universe does not punish, it harmonizes, it adjusts. When you suffer, it's not cruelty, it's calibration. But few can see that while drowning. Steiner compared fate to a sculptor, brutal with the chisel, merciful in intention. Close your eyes and look back at your own life. The coincidences, the impossible meetings, the narrow escapes, the strange attractions that defied logic. If you trace them carefully, you'll see the pattern shimmering faintly under the surface. The voice that whispered, "Go there," the silence that kept you from speaking. These were not random. They were threads being pulled, guiding you toward a lesson you promised to learn long ago. Steiner said, "Destiny reveals itself only to those who stop resisting it. The more you fight the flow, the tighter the web becomes." He urged his students to stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What for?" Because once that question shifts, suffering transforms into initiation. Fate becomes teacher, not tormentor. The invisible threads no longer strangle, they guide. And perhaps that is the hidden terror, that your life is not happening to you, but through you, that you're not a passenger, but the author who forgot he was writing. Steiner believed that remembering this truth is both the greatest awakening and the most unbearable weight. Because once you see the pattern, you realize nothing, absolutely nothing, was ever an accident. The spiderweb shimmers again. You reach to touch it, and it trembles back, alive, responsive, aware. That's when you understand the final whisper of Steiner's teaching. Destiny is not the prison of the soul, it is the map back home. And every thread, even the ones that cut, points to the same silent truth. You were never lost, only asleep. Rudolf Steiner used to say that karma was not punishment, it was memory. That's the first truth people reject, because it strips away the comfort of blaming fate, God, or chance. In his lectures, Steiner described karma as the moral physics of the universe. Every thought, every emotion, every silent intention ripples outward, bending reality until balance is restored. But not all debts are paid in one lifetime. The soul, he said, carries a ledger. It closes no account until harmony is achieved. To most, that sounds like mysticism. To Steiner, it was the architecture of existence. You don't escape what you've created, you simply meet it again, wearing a different face. He warned that people misunderstand karma as divine revenge. But the universe does not rage. It remembers. It doesn't strike back. It mirrors. Each life, each incarnation, is a continuation of a single unfolding story. And here's the forbidden part. According to Steiner, karma doesn't just bind you to people, it binds you to your own ignorance. Until you see the pattern, you live inside it. The abuser becomes the abused, the betrayer becomes the betrayed, the indifferent soul returns to learn empathy by drowning in the same coldness it once inflicted. The law is flawless, impersonal, terrifyingly just. In 1910, during a private gathering, Steiner told a story few have heard. He spoke of a man haunted by dreams of drowning. Each night, he saw a child's hand slipping beneath the surface of black water. He would wake gasping, heart thrashing like an animal. He was a successful businessman, rational, scornful of superstition. Yet the dream followed him through decades, until one evening he collapsed from exhaustion and confessed it to Steiner. The seer closed his eyes and said quietly, "You are the one who held the child under." It was not an accusation, it was recognition. The man began to weep, though he could not remember the act. Steiner said the soul never forgets, even when the brain does. Some memories are too heavy for one lifetime. They sink into the next. Karma, in Steiner's view, is the moral gravity of the cosmos. It pulls every imbalance back toward equilibrium, no matter how many ages it takes. And yet, he warned, awareness changes the velocity of this return. When you become conscious of your karmic weight, you begin to participate in your own redemption. Unconscious souls are dragged by destiny. Awakened souls walk beside it. That's why Steiner said knowledge is dangerous. It shortens the leash between cause and consequence. Once you know, you can't unknow. The universe stops whispering and begins demanding. Modern psychology has started to stumble into the edges of this ancient map. Jung called it the shadow, the parts of the self buried and denied, only to surface through projection and repetition. Cognitive therapy speaks of schemas, behavioral echoes that force us to relive our wounds until we resolve them. Epigenetic science now reveals that trauma leaves biochemical signatures in our DNA, passed down like invisible curses. What Steiner intuited a century ago is being traced in laboratories today. The body, like the soul, remembers everything. Karma is not stored in heaven. It is stored in the nervous system. He said karma unfolds in layers: thought, emotion, and action. The lightest ripples come from what we think, the heaviest from what we do. But most of humanity never learns to see the invisible chain between the two. We curse our bad luck, never realizing we are touching the recoil of our own past gestures. Steiner compared this to striking a bell and forgetting we were the ones who hit it. When the echo returns, we call it injustice. But the universe only ever repeats our tone. The forbidden aspect of karma, according to Steiner, lies in its moral neutrality. The cosmos doesn't take sides. Saints and sinners are treated with the same precision. That is why enlightenment is terrifying. It reveals that even your suffering is self-authored. The divine is not a judge, it's an accountant. Every vibration, every heartbeat, every cruel word is logged in the invisible arithmetic of destiny. But, he insisted, this arithmetic is sacred because it aims not to punish, but to educate. Suffering is the tuition fee of wisdom. Once the lesson is integrated, the pain dissolves. In ancient Sanskrit, karma means action. But Steiner expanded it. He said, action doesn't end where it begins. Every choice is a seed planted in the soil of eternity. You may die before it flowers, but it will bloom somewhere, sometime, in a life you'll recognize as your own. He taught that those who understand this law begin to act differently. They stop asking for justice and start seeking coherence. They stop cursing the storm and start remembering when they were the wind. The true horror and beauty of karma is that it is self-correcting. You can deceive anyone but the law that lives inside you. You can silence your conscience, but it will speak again through coincidence, illness, loss, déjà vu, or the face of someone you wronged centuries ago. Steiner said the universe has a perfect memory. Nothing is erased, only rewritten. And so he left his students with a final warning disguised as a benediction. Every thought you release is a messenger that will one day knock at your door. Some will bring gifts, some will bring fire, but all will bring you back to yourself. Karma, he whispered, is not the punishment for forgetting who you are. It is the path that forces you to remember. Rudolf Steiner once said that before you are born, you write a book. Not with ink, but with light. Every chapter contains the essence of experiences you must face. The betrayals, the awakenings, the illnesses, the inexplicable meetings. He called this book the astral blueprint, the invisible architecture of destiny. You don't remember writing it because memory is the first veil the soul accepts in order to experience itself anew. Without forgetfulness, there would be no discovery. Without darkness, there would be no evolution. The tragedy is that we mistake this voluntary amnesia for chaos. We believe life happens to us, when in truth, it happens through us. According to Steiner, your astral body, that subtle field surrounding your physical form, is not a ghostly decoration, but a living archive. It carries the echoes of your past existences, the weight of old vows, the fingerprints of every emotion ever felt. It vibrates with the unfulfilled lessons of previous incarnations, shaping how you think, love, and even how your heart breaks. Each fear you can't explain, each attraction you can't resist, each dream that feels more real than waking, all of it is data stored in that luminous geometry of your being. You may call it energy, psychology, or subconscious, but Steiner saw it as sacred design. The astral body, he said, begins weaving your destiny before conception. It chooses the parents who will irritate you into awareness, the body that will teach you limits, the time and place whose culture will sculpt your illusions. Every factor is chosen not for comfort, but for growth. Steiner's voice would lower as he explained this. The soul never seeks ease, it seeks friction. Because only friction reveals what resists change within you. Only resistance produces heat, and heat, in spiritual language, is consciousness. He compared the astral blueprint to a celestial compass that doesn't point north, but inward. Each event in life is a coordinate guiding you back toward equilibrium. The people you meet are not random, they are checkpoints, each carrying the frequency of a specific lesson. Some are mirrors that reveal your hidden virtues. Others are shadows that expose your unhealed wounds. Steiner said that destiny is the mathematics of empathy, the precise unfolding of experiences required for the soul to understand itself through others. You attract what you still need to comprehend, not what you prefer. Modern neuroscience is beginning to stumble into similar terrain, though it avoids spiritual language. Studies in neuroplasticity show that the brain rewires itself according to repetition, that emotion reshapes perception, and that the body stores trauma like frozen electricity. Carl Jung echoed Steiner's view when he said that what you fail to make conscious will return as fate, which Steiner called the astral pattern, Jung called the complex. Both meant the same thing, an inner program seeking resolution through outer events. Close your eyes for a moment. Think of a recurring situation that drains you, a relationship that loops, a job that collapses, a fear that stalks you even in calmness. Now imagine that these are not curses but coordinates. Each loop is a signal pulsing from your astral blueprint, trying to draw your attention to the precise point of misalignment. Steiner said that until you learn the lesson behind a pattern, destiny will recycle it with exquisite patience. The universe is not cruel, it is consistent. He once described meeting a woman who felt haunted by loneliness despite being surrounded by affection. Her dreams were filled with corridors, doors she could not open, and distant music she could never reach. Steiner told her, "That sound is your past self calling you home." Well, he believed her isolation was not punishment, but residue from a life where she rejected others. In this incarnation, she had chosen solitude to understand the pain she once caused. Healing, he said, would come the moment she accepted the loneliness as her own reflection. And she did. Within months, the dreams changed, the doors opened, and the music turned into laughter. Destiny, in Steiner's eyes, was not a dictator, but an instructor. The astral body records every unfinished symphony and orchestrates a life where those notes can finally be completed. When we resist, we feel cursed. When we cooperate, we begin to hear the music again. He often warned his students, "Your higher self will use suffering as a megaphone until you listen." Every heartbreak is an alarm, every illness a coded message, every coincidence a whisper from the architect within. Science may measure synapses, but it cannot yet chart longing, that inexplicable sense that your life is a map to something unseen. Steiner said, longing is the compass of the astral body. It points not to what you desire, but to what you promised. That's why some goals, once achieved, feel hollow. They were never yours. They were distractions inserted by a mind afraid of remembering its original contract. He urged humanity to reclaim authorship, to meditate not for peace, but for recollection. Because remembering who you were is the first step toward choosing who you'll become. And so, in the dim light of early lectures, he would whisper the phrase that his students never forgot. You are living inside your own handwriting. The astral blueprint is not fixed. It breathes. It evolves as you awaken. Each act of awareness rewrites a line in your destiny. And perhaps that's the mercy Steiner left hidden between the lines, that while fate begins as architecture, consciousness can still redraw the design. Destiny is not a prison of marble. It is wet clay. The moment you recognize the pattern recognizes you, and in that recognition, the script trembles, waiting for your next sentence. It begins quietly, like a whisper beneath the noise of daily life, a face in a crowd that makes your heart race for no reason. A song that makes you cry, though you've never heard it before. A place that feels like home, even though your passport disagrees. Rudolf Steiner said these are not coincidences. They are memories wearing new masks. The past is not gone. It's folded inside the present, pulsing through every moment, waiting to be acknowledged. When ignored, it hunts you. When understood, it liberates you. Steiner spoke often about repetition compulsion long before psychology gave it a name. He claimed that unresolved karma re-enters your life disguised as déjà vu, a pattern looping until recognition breaks the curse. You think you're falling in love again, but it's the same lesson wearing different eyes. You think you've escaped your pain, but it finds you in a new city with the same emotional architecture. He warned that the soul doesn't forget unfinished business. It reconstructs it. It replays the scene until you finally act differently. That's why, he said, destiny feels both intimate and cruel. It knows exactly where to press. He once told a story that his followers never forgot. In Vienna, a young painter came to him plagued by recurring nightmares of fire. Always the same, a cathedral engulfed in flames, people screaming, the smell of incense and ash. He couldn't bear to attend church or even look at candles. Steiner gazed at him in silence before saying, "You were there. You set the fire." The man froze. Steiner described visions of the 15th century, a time of heresy trials, of a priest consumed by hatred disguised as faith. The painter began trembling. "I can feel it," he said. "I know that smoke." Steiner explained that the soul seeks balance through experience. In this life, the man's art, filled with light and sacred imagery, was his atonement. He was painting the church he once destroyed. Psychology would later echo this cosmic symmetry. Jung observed that trauma returns through symbols, dreams, and relationships. Modern studies show that the brain repeats familiar pain because it's trying to master it. What Steiner called karmic memory, science calls neuroplastic adaptation. The mind, like the soul, loops until it understands. You don't choose what you relive, but you choose how consciously you do it. Awareness turns repetition into revelation. Steiner often compared the human soul to a theater. Every life is a stage where old actors return, wearing new costumes, speaking different lines, but performing the same unresolved play. You recognize them instantly. The friend you trust without reason, the enemy you despise without cause, the lover whose touch feels ancient. They are fragments of your unfinished script. Until the curtain closes cleanly, the drama will continue across centuries. He taught that karma is not just about events, it's about vibrations. Every emotion you suppress becomes a frequency-seeking harmony. Rage attracts rage. Guilt attracts punishment. Love attracts redemption. This is not superstition, it's resonance. The universe is an orchestra, and every soul plays a recurring motif until it learns to change the tune. Steiner said, "What you fear most will find you, not to destroy you, but to remind you that you are stronger than the memory." Let's pause here. Think of something in your life that keeps returning. A betrayal, a loss, a cycle that seems written in invisible ink. What if that isn't misfortune, but choreography? What if the universe has been staging the same lesson in different costumes because you've refused to recognize your own handwriting? Steiner believed that until we accept responsibility for the script, we cannot rewrite it. The past will keep knocking louder each time until the door opens from the inside. He described karma as an inner compass that always points toward equilibrium, no matter how violent the detour. The problem is that the ego interprets this magnetic pull as tragedy. We call it bad luck, heartbreak, injustice. But from the soul's perspective, these are recalibrations, sacred collisions meant to awaken memory. He warned that resisting them only intensifies the force of return. Denial is the most painful teacher. In one of his later lectures, Steiner said something that silenced the room. No one truly escapes the scene of their crime. They reincarnate as the victim to learn compassion. He didn't mean literal punishment, but psychological inversion, the soul experiencing the opposite pole of its past behavior to achieve balance. The arrogant are born into humility, the cruel into tenderness, the indifferent into suffering that opens their heart. What seems like fate's cruelty is, in his view, divine pedagogy. Science is beginning to trace similar loops across generations. Researchers in trauma inheritance found that descendants of Holocaust survivors carry genetic markers of anxiety and fear responses shaped by events they never lived. Pain migrates through bloodlines, searching for resolution. The body remembers, the mind interprets, and the spirit repeats until consciousness intervenes. Steiner predicted this a century ago when he said, "The soul writes its story into the flesh. When the past hunts you, it's not an enemy. It's a messenger disguised as chaos. It stalks you through dreams, coincidences, and relationships, whispering, 'Remember what you came here to finish.'" Steiner taught that liberation begins when you stop running and start decoding the message. Every haunting is a homework assignment from the eternal self. Once completed, the ghost dissolves, not because it was exorcised, but because it was understood. And so the painter's nightmares ended, not through prayer or penance, but through art, the transformation of memory into beauty. Steiner said that was karma transmuted into grace, because when you meet your past with awareness, its claws turn into wings, and maybe that's the deepest secret of destiny. The past doesn't chase you to punish you. It chases you to hand you back your own power, the power to end the story that began centuries ago. Rudolf Steiner lived in the twilight between two worlds, the world of microscopes and the world of mysteries. He believed that science and spirit were not enemies, but estranged siblings. One dissects the body, the other dissects the soul, yet both seek the same thing, the laws that make existence coherent. The scientist measures the shadow, he once said. The initiate studies the light that casts it. And in that sentence lies the forbidden bridge between karma and neuroscience, between destiny and DNA. Because if Steiner was right, the machinery of the universe is not mechanical at all. It's moral. It remembers intention, it records vibration, and it adjusts reality accordingly. In the early 1900s, while Freud was mapping desire and Einstein was bending time, Steiner stood in lecture halls describing the invisible forces shaping matter itself. He spoke of etheric currents and spiritual atoms, of how thoughts are not private but electromagnetic, ripples in the moral field of creation. People mocked him, of course. Yet a century later, physics speaks of entanglement, of particles connected across distance, moving in eerie coordination. Steiner would have smiled. He said, "The soul and the cosmos obey the same geometry." He saw karma not as superstition, but as a kind of spiritual physics, the conservation of moral energy. Nothing is lost, nothing appears without cause. Modern science now echoes this principle through the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Replace energy with action, and you have the essence of karma. Your deeds never vanish. They change form and return. To the scientist, that's mechanics. To Steiner, it's justice. Contemporary research has begun brushing against this ancient truth. Epigeneticists discovered that trauma leaves molecular fingerprints, switching genes on and off, scripting biological echoes of experience. Children of famine victims show altered stress responses. Grandchildren of war survivors carry cortisol imbalances they never earned. What Steiner described as the soul's continuity is now visible in the language of cells. Memory, it seems, is not confined to the mind. It stains the body, it drips into bloodlines. The laboratory has confirmed what the mystic whispered. The past is not over. It lives inside you. Steiner anticipated this union of science and spirit when he warned that humanity would one day face a terrible temptation to study the mechanism of the soul and call it chemistry. He feared a future where humans would explain consciousness as a side effect of neurons, forgetting that neurons themselves obey spiritual law. He said, "When science removes the sacred, it blinds itself to the whole. The mind becomes a machine, the body a coincidence, and destiny an illusion. But the shadow of spirit remains, flickering just beyond the microscope's lens. Imagine a scientist holding a human heart in his gloved hands. He can measure its weight, its rhythm, its texture, but not its longing. That longing, Steiner said, is where karma hides. It is the gravitational pull of unfinished meaning. You can measure the heartbeat, but not the reason it aches." He believed that emotion was evidence of the soul's continuity. Every sorrow is an experiment in self-awareness. Every joy a result recorded in the cosmic ledger. The laboratory and the temple are simply two rooms of the same house. Modern psychology continues to rediscover his insight. Cognitive science admits that most decisions are unconscious, shaped by patterns formed long before we are aware of them. The brain, like a karmic accountant, repeats behaviors until the emotional debt is paid. Neural pathways reinforce repetition, a biological mirror of spiritual law. Steiner once said, "Habit is the ghost of karma dressed in biology. When you finally choose differently, you alter not just your fate, but your brain's architecture. Consciousness rewires matter." In quantum theory, the observer influences the experiment merely by looking, a principle known as the observer effect. Steiner anticipated this when he taught that perception itself reshapes destiny. To see clearly, he said, is to create differently. The moment you witness your own pattern with awareness, the pattern begins to dissolve. Science calls it neuroplasticity. Mysticism calls it awakening. The names don't matter, the transformation does. He believed the day would come when science would rediscover reverence, when researchers would realize that every equation is a prayer written in numbers. "You cannot dissect truth," he said. "You can only participate in it. That participation," he insisted, "is what connects karma and physics. Both are interactive, responsive, alive. The universe reacts to consciousness the way a mirror reacts to light. Whatever you project, it reflects, precisely, neutrally, mercilessly. Perhaps that's why Steiner's warnings feel prophetic now. Humanity, armed with technology, still wanders spiritually blind. We clone cells, but cannot cure despair. We measure the universe, but cannot explain why it feels empty." Steiner's voice echoes across a century like a ghost in a laboratory. You've mastered the shadow, but forgotten the source of the light. And yet, he offered hope. He believed that the evolution of science itself is karmic, that humanity is destined to reunite intellect with spirit. The scientist will become the mystic once again. The microscope will become an altar. And when that day comes, the split between fate and free will vanish. We will see that karma was never superstition, but the moral mathematics of creation, a language the universe has been speaking all along, waiting for us to finally listen. Rudolf Steiner often said that truth does not belong to one culture. It reincarnates. Every civilization, in its own tongue, has whispered the same secret. Nothing in the universe is forgotten. The Egyptians called it ma'at, the weighing of the heart. The Greeks called it ananka, the inescapable necessity that binds gods and men. The Hindus called it karma, the wheel that spins until all debts are balanced. Steiner believed these were not different doctrines, but different mirrors, each reflecting a fragment of one eternal law. What you create in consciousness becomes your destiny. And through the ages, humanity has dressed this law in myth to protect itself from the unbearable thought that it is fully responsible for everything it experiences. He loved to remind his students that the ancients didn't see time as a straight line, but as a circle. Life was not a beginning and an end. It was a return. To the ancient Greeks, fate was woven by three sisters, the Moirai. One spun the thread of life, one measured it, and one cut it. Steiner said these were allegories of the threefold structure of karma: creation, manifestation, and release. The fates were not cruel deities. They were the soul's own mechanisms of balance. The tragedy of Oedipus was not divine punishment, but unconscious self-recognition. He fled his prophecy only to fulfill it, just as we flee our inner patterns only to meet them again in disguise. In India, thousands of years before Steiner, sages spoke of samsara, the endless wheel of rebirth turning until the soul achieves moksha, liberation through awareness. Karma, in that sense, was the invisible architecture of evolution. Steiner saw his work not as invention, but as continuation. He said that Western philosophy forgot what Eastern mystics preserved, that morality is not commanded by God, but by the structure of reality itself. You cannot break the law, he said. You can only break yourself against it. He connected this to the mystery schools of Egypt, where initiates were taught that every thought emitted a geometrical form in the astral realm. The pure of heart radiated symmetry, the corrupt radiated distortion. After death, those shapes weighed the soul. That is why Egyptians placed the heart, not the brain, on the scale of Ma'at. The heart was memory. It knew what the mind denied. Steiner explained that this ancient ritual encoded the same principle he taught. The soul measures itself. Judgment is not imposed. It unfolds from within, like the bloom of a seed carrying its own pattern. In the Christian mysticism Steiner revered, the same idea hides behind parable. As you sow, so shall you reap. Yet centuries of dogma twisted it into fear. Steiner believed Christ's teaching of resurrection was not about physical immortality, but karmic continuity, the assurance that the soul cannot be extinguished by death. The cross itself, he said, was an ancient symbol of intersection, horizontal for time, vertical for eternity. Where they meet stands the human being crucified between past and future, destined to transform both through awareness. He saw echoes of karma even in Nordic and Celtic myth, where destiny was a living tapestry. The Norns, like the Greek fates, spun the thread of each soul beneath the roots of the world tree. The tree, Yggdrasil, represented the interconnectedness of all beings. One branch trembles and the whole cosmos feels it. Modern science might call this quantum entanglement. Ancient poets called it divine justice. Steiner said, every myth is a memory of spiritual law. The ancients spoke poetry where we speak formulas. What fascinated him most was how every civilization seemed to intuit the same paradox, that freedom and fate are not opposites. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, your duty is action, not its fruit. To act consciously is freedom. To expect control is bondage. Steiner echoed this, warning that true liberation comes only when you act in harmony with the design your soul chose before birth. Destiny is not chains, he wrote, but choreography. The dancer may move as she pleases, but the rhythm is eternal. Even indigenous traditions, far removed from European philosophy, pulse with the same knowing. Native American teachings speak of the seventh generation principle, that every decision reverberates 7 generations into the future. The soul, the tribe, the earth are one organism balancing itself through time. Steiner called this collective karma, the recognition that what one man does, humanity inherits. We are each other's ancestors. He believed that the collapse of ancient civilizations was not random. It was karmic rebalancing on a grand scale. Egypt fell when wisdom became pride. Rome collapsed when power replaced virtue. Atlantis, he claimed, vanished when humanity abused spiritual knowledge for domination. Whether you take this literally or symbolically, the message remains the same. When consciousness forgets its moral geometry, the structure of the world begins to crack. The universe reclaims its symmetry through destruction. Karma applies not only to individuals, but to empires. Steiner often ended his lectures with a story from Persian lore. A traveler flees from death and hides in a distant city, only to meet death there waiting at the gate. I was surprised to see you in the city, Death says, for that's where I had our appointment. The audience would fall silent. Then he'd smile faintly and add, the soul always keeps its appointments. From temples carved in desert stone to monasteries echoing with chants, humanity has never stopped trying to bargain with this law. But Steiner believed the only true prayer is consciousness itself. To remember is to heal. To see the thread is to stop weaving suffering. Every ancient myth was a mirror placed before the modern soul, reflecting the same invitation: awaken. Because the gods you fear, the destiny you blame, and the justice you await all live behind your own eyes. You feel it before you understand it, that zeitgeist, or that slow magnetic pull toward repetition, the same arguments with different faces, the same endings disguised as new beginnings. You call it bad luck, or coincidence, or fate, but Rudolf Steiner called it something else entirely: karmic debt. Not punishment, not revenge, but the unfinished business of the soul demanding resolution. He said the universe speaks in patterns. If you ignore the lesson, the pattern repeats. If you resist, the pattern intensifies, and if you awaken, the pattern dissolves, not because it was defeated, but because it was finally understood. Steiner warned that karmic debt rarely announces itself with thunder. It hides in whispers in the subtle geometry of your life. You know it when time feels circular, when different people trigger the same wound, when joy feels temporary and sorrow feels familiar. He called these sensations echoes from the soul's unfinished symphony. Each echo is a reminder. Somewhere in your spiritual ledger, something remains unbalanced. And balance, he said, is the deepest law of the cosmos. The universe will rearrange itself endlessly to restore it. He described 4 primary signs that the past is pulling at you. The first is emotional gravity, a disproportionate reaction to something small. You overreact, not because of the present, but because of the weight attached to it. The second is recurrence, the same type of betrayal, the same failure, the same illness, arriving again and again like a ghost with perfect timing. The third is irrational attachment, being drawn to someone or something that makes no logical sense but feels inevitable, as if your souls recognize a contract your mind forgot. And the fourth is synchronicity, the uncanny sense that invisible hands are arranging coincidences around you, guiding you toward awareness. Steiner used to tell his students that karmic encounters are rarely gentle. They provoke, agitate, sometimes even destroy, because they are designed to wake you. The soul, he said, will choose the medicine that tastes most bitter. He illustrated this with a haunting story from one of his private consultations. A woman came to him in despair after her husband's sudden death. "Why would destiny take him from me?" she asked. Steiner closed his eyes and said softly, "Because in another life, you took him from yourself." He explained that her grief was not divine cruelty, but cosmic reconciliation, the restoration of empathy through experience. She wept, but something shifted. The pain remained, but it began to make sense. Modern psychology mirrors this teaching in its own cautious language. Therapists speak of repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate familiar pain until it's finally resolved. Neuroscience tells us that trauma engraves circuits in the brain, and those circuits fire again when similar stimuli appear. We are, in a way, programmed to reenact what we haven't integrated. Steiner's karmic model and modern science agree on one point: awareness is the cure. The moment you name the pattern, you weaken its spell. But karmic signs are not always tragic. Sometimes they appear as sudden love, uncanny talent, or unearned fortune. Steiner called these credit from previous lives, the fruits of compassion, discipline, and wisdom already cultivated. He warned, however, that such gifts can become new debts if used carelessly. Every power, he said, demands reverence. To misuse talent is to sow arrogance, to exploit love is to plant loneliness, to waste opportunity is to create stagnation. The moral economy of the cosmos is subtle but exact. He described karmic debt as a magnetic field surrounding every individual, invisible yet perceptible to the sensitive. When two fields resonate, harmony or tension, a karmic connection activates. This is why, he said, some people feel instantly familiar, and others instantly threatening. You're not meeting them for the first time, you are meeting them again. Souls recognize their unfinished dialogues, he said, and rush to continue them. There are sensory clues, too. Flashes of memory during sleep, the scent of something ancient that shouldn't be there, the feeling of walking into a place and knowing you've been there before. Steiner considered these bleed-throughs from the astral archive. They are not delusions, they are reminders. The past is patient, he wrote. It waits until the moment you can bear to remember. He warned his students never to obsess over identifying exact past lives or debts. That was vanity disguised as spirituality. The point was not who you were, but what you still carry. He said the most important question is not who was I, but what am I still repeating? The form changes, but the essence remains until it is forgiven. Forgiveness, in Steiner's system, is not mercy toward another. It is the alchemy that ends the cycle. To forgive is to declare the lesson complete. Karmic debt also manifests in the body. Chronic pain, recurring illness, or unexplainable fatigue often mirror spiritual imbalances. Steiner believed the body was a transcript of the soul's history, where guilt festers, tissue weakens, where resentment hides, inflammation burns. Healing, therefore, must begin not with the symptom, but with the confession, I understand. In that moment, the disease loses its narrative power. He compared karmic awareness to waking up in a dream. The monsters are still there, but once you know their projections, they can't kill you. The karmic web is only a prison, he said, until you see that the walls are woven by your own hands. And when you see that, truly see it, something extraordinary happens. Compassion replaces fear. You stop asking why life hurts you and start asking what it's trying to teach. The hidden signs of karmic debt are not meant to scare you. They are invitations. Every repetition, every pain, every synchronicity is the universe whispering it's time. Steiner's teachings turned fate into feedback. The soul does not want you to suffer. It wants you to evolve. And when you finally listen, when you say, I understand, the wheel slows, the pattern loosens. And for the first time, the present moment stops being haunted by the past. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a doorway to freedom. Rudolf Steiner often described the path of karmic realization as a spiral, not a staircase. You don't ascend neatly from ignorance to enlightenment. You circle again and again through the same landscapes of emotion, grief, desire, anger, guilt, each time seeing them from a higher vantage. The soul does not move in straight lines. It loops, it revisits. It returns to the same place, only to realize that the place has changed because you have changed. This spiral is the architecture of awakening. To those who resist, it feels like torment. To those who accept, it becomes the geometry of liberation. He said every human being passes through distinct phases on this spiral, each one marked by a psychological shift that mirrors the soul's evolution. The first phase is sleep, life lived on autopilot. You call it normalcy. Days blur into weeks. Choices repeat patterns inherited from parents. Desires echo advertisements. Pain feels meaningless. You believe you are free, but your strings are pulled by forgotten vows and unconscious fears. Steiner called this the karmic dream, the stage where the soul gathers data through repetition, unaware that repetition itself is the message. Most of humanity, he said, never moves beyond this phase. The second phase is disruption. Something cracks the surface. A betrayal, an illness, a loss, a failure so deep it breaks the illusion of control. You begin to ask, why me? That question marks the first tremor of awakening. Steiner said, destiny uses suffering as an alarm clock. Pain is not cruelty, it is architecture. It forces you to stop sleepwalking through inherited karma. The soul's lessons become audible only when the noise of comfort fades. Suffering, he said, is the soul's way of touching the mind. In this phase, you start to notice patterns. You sense déjà vu in your relationships. The same argument repeats. The same ending follows every new beginning. This recognition is both terrifying and sacred. The moment the mirror begins to reflect. The third phase is resistance. Now that you see the pattern, you fight it. You analyze, you blame, you run. You seek distractions, new partners, new cities, new ideologies. But wherever you go, the pattern follows because it lives inside you. Steiner compared this phase to a moth fighting its own attraction to the flame. The ego calls the pattern bad luck, never realizing it's chasing its own projection. Yet resistance has a purpose. It exhausts you. And exhaustion, paradoxically, is the gate to surrender. Surrender ushers in the fourth phase, recognition. This is when you stop saying, why me, and start whispering, what for? Steiner taught that this shift is the soul's first breath after drowning. You begin to see the intricate intelligence behind your suffering, how each event was a lesson in disguise, how each heartbreak sculpted empathy, how each failure humbled arrogance. He described this phase as a sunrise, slow, silent, and irreversible. The same circumstances remain, but perception changes everything. Recognition turns the wheel of karma into a mirror of growth rather than punishment. Then comes the fifth phase, transmutation. Awareness alone isn't enough. You must act differently. You must respond to the same triggers with new consciousness. Steiner warned that this is where most seekers stumble. They mistake understanding for transformation. True change, he said, is alchemical. You take the same metal of your experience and forge it into a new shape. When you forgive instead of retaliate, when you speak truth instead of hiding, when you bless the wound instead of cursing it, the karmic pattern begins to collapse. The lesson is complete. The energy once tied to pain becomes available as wisdom. Every time you act differently, he said, you rewrite your destiny's geometry. The final phase is integration. The spiral no longer feels like punishment. It feels like dance. You revisit old patterns not to suffer, but to serve others. Your empathy becomes your teaching. Steiner said, souls who reach this level no longer generate karma. They resolve it for the collective. They become mirrors for those still sleeping, light for those still stumbling through repetition. Such souls, he wrote, carry the fragrance of freedom. Their pain has turned to perfume. Modern psychology has accidentally charted the same stages under different names. Denial, confrontation, insight, change, integration. Neurobiology shows that trauma, when consciously revisited, can be rewired. The same neural loops that once triggered fear can become pathways of calm once met with awareness. What the mystic calls transmutation, the scientist calls neuroplasticity. different languages, same liberation. Steiner emphasized that these phases are cyclical. You may awaken in one area of life, love, purpose, morality, while remaining asleep in another. The spiral keeps turning until the whole soul resonates with coherence. He warned that enlightenment is not a destination, but a habit, cultivated through vigilance. To live consciously, he said, is to polish the mirror every day. The moment you stop, dust returns, not as punishment, but as reminder. He compared the spiral of awakening to breathing, expansion and contraction, learning and forgetting. Even advanced souls fall back into darkness sometimes, but each return is gentler, faster, more lucid. The universe doesn't demand perfection. It demands participation. Karma, in its highest form, is not a judge. It's choreography between your ignorance and your awakening, each step perfectly timed to the rhythm of evolution. And so the spiral turns. You feel yourself pulled again towards something familiar. A face, a fear, a choice. But this time, you pause. You breathe. You remember. The past still calls, but the call no longer controls you. That is the quiet miracle Steiner spoke of. The day the soul stops running in circles and begins walking in spirals. The direction is the same, but the view is infinitely higher. Rudolf Steiner warned that karma is not only personal, it is collective. Whole civilizations, he said, move through reincarnations just like individuals. They rise, decay, and return wearing new names, but carrying the same unfinished lessons. Nations, like souls, inherit memories. You can feel it in the air, that ancient tension that never really dissolves, only changes costume. Wars end, but the vibration remains. Flags change, languages evolve, but the same archetypal wounds haunt humanity in cycles. The earth itself, Steiner wrote, was a being undergoing initiation. Every culture is one of its dreams, and we are the dreamers inside it. He often compared collective karma to a storm, formed from countless individual breaths, each exhale of fear or hatred gathering until the sky must release it. Every act of cruelty, every denial of truth, every silence in the face of injustice contributes to the weather of the world. When it finally rains, we call it history. You are not separate from the storm, he said. You are the storm. That realization terrified people because it stripped away the illusion of innocence. To Steiner, ignorance was never neutral. To look away from evil is to help it grow roots. He foresaw the 20th century's catastrophes decades before they unfolded. He spoke of mechanized souls, of a future where science, divorced from spirit, would lead to collective madness. Machines would serve man until man began to serve the machine. He warned that if humanity did not reconnect moral awareness with technological power, destiny would respond with correction through chaos. His audience laughed nervously. They didn't laugh later. Steiner saw karma not as mystical punishment, but as the balancing intelligence of history. When a civilization forgets compassion, events arise to force remembrance. He believed that nations possess a spiritual body just as individuals do, an egregore, a collective aura shaped by shared values and traumas. When those values become distorted, the aura darkens, and destiny arranges experiences that expose the shadow. For example, societies built on conquest eventually become the conquered. Those founded on exploitation face collapse from within. He compared it to gravity, inevitable, impersonal, just. The suffering of nations, he said, is the mirror of their forgotten ideals. Look around, and his warnings echo through the headlines. Cycles of oppression, extremism, inequality, all familiar masks of ancient lessons unlearned. Each generation believes it's more enlightened than the last, yet the same archetypes return. Tyrant and savior, victim and rescuer, prophet and denier. Steiner said this repetition is not failure but feedback. Humanity evolves collectively the same way an individual does, through pain, recognition, and transmutation. We are, at this very moment, the nervous system of a planet trying to heal itself. Modern psychology has its parallel in collective trauma theory. Sociologists describe how unresolved national wounds, slavery, genocide, persecution, create psychic imprints that shape behavior for centuries. Descendants carry both guilt and grief that are not entirely their own. Science calls it intergenerational transmission. Steiner called it karmic inheritance. When a society represses its shadow, it externalizes it, creating enemies, scapegoats, ideologies that mirror the disowned self. Every war, he said, is the subconscious of humanity made visible. He taught that healing collective karma begins with truth, not the truth of propaganda or politics, but the quiet acknowledgement of pain denied. Wherever truth is buried, he warned, destiny digs graves. He urged his followers to practice spiritual courage, to see the suffering of others as their own delayed consequence. Compassion, he insisted, is not sentiment but geometry. Every act of empathy realigns the pattern of the world. And to forgive another nation, he said, is to lighten your own future. Steiner described the evolution of humanity in epochs, each with its unique test. The Atlantean age taught responsibility for power. The Greco-Roman age taught balance between body and spirit. Our current age, he said, teaches consciousness within materialism to remember the invisible while surrounded by machines. The danger of forgetting is immense. If humanity mistakes comfort for evolution, destiny will shatter that comfort to restore awareness. Crises are karmic interventions, painful, precise, necessary. He saw glimpses of the future that sound disturbingly familiar. Information is both weapon and salvation. Virtual worlds seducing the soul into amnesia, people losing the ability to distinguish between perception and reality. When illusion becomes currency, he said, truth will become rebellion. This, he warned, is the turning point of collective karma. When lies reach saturation, truth explodes as chaos. Only then can a new cycle begin. And yet, Steiner never preached despair. He believed humanity was not doomed, but in adolescence, a species learning the consequences of its own creation. Just as an individual awakens through suffering, the world evolves through collective crisis. He envisioned a future where humans, scarred but wiser, would rebuild civilization around cooperation rather than competition. One day, he said, nations will speak not of borders but of balance. He taught that each person's awakening contributes to the healing of the whole. When you confront your personal shadow, you reduce the darkness of humanity by a fraction. When you forgive, you release a knot in the world's fabric. Karma, personal or collective, obeys resonance. Every act of awareness ripples outward, softening the field of history. Steiner often ended his lectures with a prayer disguised as prophecy. The salvation of the world depends not on the masses, but on the awakened few who remember what humanity forgot. So when you look at the chaos of the world, corruption, violence, division, don't ask, why is this happening? Ask, what is this teaching us? The answer will always be the same, consciousness. The earth is not punishing us. It is mirroring us. And when we finally stop running from our own reflection, history itself will exhale. The storm will calm, not because it ended, but because we remembered we were the sky all along. Rudolf Steiner believed that all karma, no matter how ancient or cruel, eventually leads to one threshold: awareness. He called it the last door, the point where the soul finally stops reacting and starts seeing. Behind that door, destiny ceases to feel like an external force. You recognize it as your own handwriting. The universe, once a battlefield, becomes a mirror. Every betrayal, every illness, every loss, they line up like teachers at the end of a long corridor, bowing silently as you walk past, no longer their prisoner, but their graduate. Steiner said the last door does not open outward, but inward. The key is consciousness itself. Until then, you are locked inside your own forgetting, running through loops of cause and consequence, blaming the shadows that you cast yourself. The greatest illusion, he wrote, is that you are at the mercy of something outside your own being. The final act of karma is self-recognition. The moment you see that you were never a victim but an author, the story changes shape. The walls dissolve, and what you called fate reveals itself as design. He described liberation not as bliss, but as lucidity. Awareness burns, it strips excuses, melts illusions, forces you to confront how every choice sculpted your life with mathematical precision. It is not pleasant to realize you summoned your own suffering. Yet, in that realization lies the beginning of freedom. You are not punished for your mistakes, Steiner said. You're educated by them. Awareness is the curriculum of eternity. You graduate when you stop defending your pain and start decoding it. The process begins subtly. First, you witness the pattern without reacting. The mind wants to fight or justify, but awareness simply observes. Then comes the alchemy. Observation without judgment transforms energy. Neuroscientists would later call this metacognition, the ability to see thought as thought rather than truth. Steiner anticipated this by a century, insisting that consciousness reshapes matter. The moment you become the observer instead of the actor, karma loses its stage, the play collapses. Only the awareness remains, radiant and silent, watching the ashes of its own drama. But liberation demands courage. Awareness is a light that exposes every corner. You see the hidden motivations behind your kindness, the subtle pride in your spirituality, the manipulations disguised as love. Most people turn away at this threshold because it annihilates the ego's story. The idea of me, the one who suffered, who tried, who deserved better, begins to disintegrate. What remains is presence, vast and impersonal. Steiner called this the moment when the higher self reclaims authorship. When the mask falls, he said, the actor remembers the script was never real. He compared awakening to stepping out of a burning house that you built yourself. The flames are terrifying until you realize they are made of your own emotions. When you stop fueling them with fear, they flicker out. In their smoke, you see a sky that was there all along. This is what he meant by liberation, not escape from karma, but transcendence through understanding. The cycle ends not because you have paid every debt, but because you finally understand there was never a debtor, only consciousness exploring itself through polarity. Modern science, again, is circling the same truth with different vocabulary. Neuroscience speaks of the default mode network, the circuitry that maintains the illusion of self. In deep meditation, that network quiets. Boundaries blur. The subject-object divide collapses. People describe the experience as oneness, timelessness, peace. Steiner would nod knowingly. That is the soul remembering its true dimension. For him, enlightenment was not supernatural. It was the restoration of natural perception, unclouded by karma's fog. At this final stage, the soul no longer generates new karma. It acts without attachment, loves without demand, gives without fear. Life continues, but it feels lighter, almost transparent. Pain still visits, but it no longer lingers. Sorrow still knocks, but it no longer breaks you. The world's cruelty loses its teeth because you no longer need it to teach you. You have learned. Steiner said that such a soul moves through life like wind through grass, touching everything, clinging to nothing. He insisted, however, that awakening is not an escape from the world, but a return to it with clear eyes. True awareness makes you more human, not less. Compassion becomes instinctive, not moral. You stop preaching about karma because you see it everywhere. In the trembling of a leaf, in a stranger's smile, in the way light bends through tears. Awareness becomes devotion. Living itself becomes prayer. And then comes silence, not emptiness, but fullness beyond words. Steiner called it the hush after the storm of lifetimes. In that silence, destiny bows. Karma, once an iron law, becomes music, a melody you can finally hear without fear. You realize there was never punishment, only precision. Every event was choreography guiding you back to this still point, the heart of awareness, where creation and creator meet. When his students asked how to know if they had reached this liberation, Steiner would smile and say, "When you no longer need to ask." Because the awakened soul stops seeking meaning, it is meaning. The spiral ends, not in heaven or escape, but in the quiet certainty that you and the universe are the same intelligence dreaming in different shapes. And so the last door opens, not with thunder, but with recognition. You look around and see nothing has changed, yet everything feels luminous. The people who hurt you are still there. The world's chaos continues. But something inside you has dissolved, one of the part that believed it was separate from the whole. That is freedom. The moment you understand that destiny was never your jailer, but your teacher in disguise. The moment you realize that every thread of karma was leading you here, to the single breath of awareness, where the story ends and consciousness, eternal and unbound, begins again.